Tonight, I would like to talk to you guys about faith. And when we think about faith, the ideas we commonly associate with that are it being unshakable or unyielding. But as we go through life, we find ourselves in situations where our faith is tested, which is why today I'd like to tell you guys a story about the times in my life when my faith is challenged. So, back in 2018, when I had just graduated from college, I finally managed to land my first job. And my first job was going to be as a news reporter for a newspaper in Kashmir. And for those of you who don't know, Kashmir is this absolutely beautiful part of the world, way north up in India. And it borders Pakistan towards the west and China towards the east. And growing up in India, you'd often hear these stories on the news about how the Indian military was defending Kashmir from Pakistani terrorists, and the fact that to this day, Kashmir remains the most heavily militarized zone in the world because India has to protect itself from these external threats. So naturally, when I broke the news in my house that this is where I would be going to work, it didn't sit very well. When I told my mother that I'd gotten a job in Kashmir and I was moving there to work, she said, "You'll be moving to Kashmir over my dead body." But weeks of bargaining, pleading, and a few tears later, I actually found myself in Kashmir. And when I just got there, my editors at the newspaper said that in the beginning, they wouldn't be able to pay me a very handsome salary, but they would take care of the place I would live in. They'd give me a house. And since our office was on the banks of one of the biggest lakes in Kashmir, they thought it would be a good idea for me to live on a houseboat. Now I know what you're all thinking. We're in the Netherlands. We see houseboats in the canals of Amsterdam every single day, and they look like nice, strong, sturdy, safe structures. Are the houseboats here similar to the ones in Kashmir? Not really. To give you an idea of how bad they were, say if you got onto a houseboat on Kashmir like this, the entire houseboat would go like this. And I was living in that houseboat in the summer. And the summers in India also happen to be the peak honeymoon season for newly married couples. So I'd be in my room, and there'd be a honeymoon couple next to me. And in the evenings, in their more intimate moments, the entire houseboat would sort of sway in accordance with their lovemaking. And I'd be sitting in my room with my noise-cancelling headphones on, also swaying. And thinking, how did my life come to this? So this was my initial exposure to Kashmir. And even at work, in the beginning, my editors didn't give me the most exciting assignments. They would say, Jugal, there's this restaurant which opened up, why don't you go review it? Or there's this new chief of police, why don't you go interview him? And I was in Kashmir, so I wanted something more dramatic. I wanted more action. So one day, when I was sitting at my desk, my Kashmiri journalist colleague came up to me and said, "Hey, Jugal, there's this protest which is going to happen this evening, and I need someone to come with me and photograph it." I said, "Awesome, I'm your guy, I'm going to come with you." And he said, "Let me warn you, it could get a little bit violent because the Indian police is going to be there and there's going to be some young, very exuberant Kashmiri protesters." I said, "You know what, I've been waiting for this day, I will follow you, I will take your lead, let's go do it." So we get on his scooter and we start driving towards the city center where the protest was. And as we get really, really close, suddenly, out of nowhere, I hear this loud bang. And I asked him what that was. And he said it was probably a flash grenade. And we got to where the protest was. We parked the scooter, and the protest was happening on this one narrow alley. And on one end of the alley was all the journalists and the Indian police. And on the other end of the alley were these protesters who were hurling stones and glass bottles in our direction. And as I go there to take photographs, my journalist colleague tells me that, "Jugal, you stand here right behind the cops. Don't go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and try to get some better pictures." And as I'm clicking pictures of what's going on, what happened was one of the kids from the other side found this unexploded canister of tear gas. And he picked it up and he sent it hurling back towards us. And it fell 5 feet from where I was standing, and it went off. And this gas started entering my system and it started burning my eyes, and I fell to my knees. And as I was trying to make sense of what was going on, I saw these 3 kids come forth from the crowd ahead. And I started washing my eyes with some water, and I see these kids coming, and they stop halfway towards us, and their faces are covered, and they're holding, all of them, this one large black piece of cloth. And in a few moments, they start unfurling this black piece of cloth, and it turned out to be an ISIS flag. And in that moment, I thought to myself, these kids can't be more than 15 or 16 years old. Do they even know what it is they're holding? Do they understand the significance of what that flag represents? So in that moment, I decided to myself that this is the topic that I'm going to cover. In my time as a journalist in Kashmir, I was going to analyze the psychological effects of war on Kashmiri children. And guys, I tried my hardest. I went to schools, I spoke to teachers, I spoke to students. But there was one conversation that I had with the principal of a school, which always stayed with me. And the school in question was in a certain district in Kashmir, which was known as the hotbed of militancy, which means that many kids from that particular district would grow up and then pick up weapons to join the struggle against the Indian state. And when I was talking to the principal of this school, I asked him, I said, look, what can we do? What sort of checks and balances can we put in place to make sure that not very many kids go down this path? And he said, we try to give them the best education. We try to give them the best opportunities outside the classroom. But if someday these kids choose this path, then there's nothing we can do. I'm like, but you're the principal, you've got your teachers, you know the parents. Surely you can stop them. And he said to me, he said, why would I stop them? He said, they're fighting for the same independence that I want. I would never stop these children. And now I'd like to bring your attention back to the theme that I started with, faith. Today, I live in the Netherlands, and no matter what I try to do with my life, whether it's trying to find a PhD program, whether it's trying to find my dream job, or whether it's me trying to make a career as a performer on stage, I am driven by one thing, and that is the future of the 1.4 billion people in the place I call home. Because I believe India is a dream and an idea worth fighting for. But every single time in the news, when I read that another Kashmiri child was killed by Indian forces, or that a Muslim man in India was lynched on the suspicions of eating beef, my faith starts to quiver a little bit. And as I stand before you today telling this story to you, I realize that I still do have that faith in me, even though I realize that sometimes that faith hangs merely by a thread.